resources, flood-prone areas, and adjoining areas of the City of Boston from net loss of their function, value, and acreage by controlling activities and mitigating effects deemed by the Boston Conservation Commission to have an adverse impact on the resource areas. This matter was sponsored by my colleague, City Councilor Michelle Wu, and District 6 City Councilor Matt O'Malley. Was referred to the Committee back on Government Operations on January the 30th of 2019. I'd like to note that this hearing is being streamed on Boston City Council TV online, is being recorded, and will be broadcast at a later date on Comcast Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, and Verizon 1964. I'd like to make this note at this time that our colleague, one of the lead sponsors, sent me a letter that says as follows: Dear Chairman Flaherty, I regret to inform you that I will be attending the funeral for my aunt this morning. I hope to be available at some point for today's hearing on docket 0250, depending on how long it goes. An ordinance protecting local wetlands and promoting climate change adaptation in the City of Boston is a big priority of mine. I look forward to reviewing the testimony and partnering with Councilor Michelle Wu and advocates on passing local wetlands and open space ordinances that address climate change and resiliency in the City of Boston. Sincerely, Matt O'Malley. We're joined here by the co-lead sponsor, City Councilor Michelle Wu, my colleague at large, City Councilor Anissa Rasabi-George, and my colleague from Alston Brighton, City Councilor Mark Siomo. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleagues if they want to make any introductory comments, and we'll get right into the panel. We have obviously the administration panel. We have another panel from advocates, and we have a panel from real estate and from NAOP that we're going to combine as the third panel, and then we'll get into any type of Q&A as well as public testimony. So with that, Chair recognizes City Councilor Michelle Wu.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to everyone for taking the time to be here today. I know I'm speaking on behalf of the co-sponsor, Councilor O'Malley, who I think is planning to be here, and he called me right before this to make sure that we were all set. This is very important to him as well, and we are eager to continue the conversation. It has been a long one from my office's perspective, and an even longer one because I know it started before I even came into office in some ways. And our goal, our motivation is just that I think we're all in agreement that Boston is very vulnerable from a climate perspective, and we as a human species are running out of time when it comes to taking action on climate change. So there should just be an acknowledgement that we're taking up every possible tool in the toolbox now, and I know that the administration, I think as early as 2014, had already committed to doing some version of a wetlands ordinance and has been working on versions of it. And even prior to that, in the last administration, had even proposed a wetlands ordinance. So just recognizing that Boston is one of only 3 coastal cities in the Commonwealth at our last check. We may be fewer than that at this point, but we are not taking the lead. We are not in the leadership position that we should be when it comes to making sure we are using this authority given to us by state law to make sure that we're addressing concerns when it comes to climate change and resiliency and adaptation. I know that I'm very grateful for the chair's scheduling of this hearing and the ability to have it in a very crowded schedule. We were hoping to have this as a working session, given that the advocates and many others had come for a hearing last year. Although there was not specific language at that time, we're hoping to continue to compare versions with the administration. As I hear, there is a draft now, although we have not been able to see it, to make sure that we are coming at this from a collaborative place. And I know I speak on behalf of everyone who's been involved with the coalition in that the #1 goal is to work together on something that is implementable for the city, and that will make sure to that will take advantage of the opportunities that we have to act at the local level. I think we are hoping that this set of proposed language is a good starting point, and that we will get feedback on versions that others may have been working on, and that this will be the time that we can come together and compare side by side. So I thank everyone for being here. We'll look forward to questions, and thank you again most to the administration and my colleagues for taking the time to be here.
Thank you, Councilor Wu, and my colleagues are waiving any additional opening statements, so we'll turn it right over to the administration. Great to see you, Chief. Chief Chris Cook is also joined by Commissioner Carl Spector, also joined by Floodplain Manager Amelia Croteau, and also Deputy Director of Waterfront Planning, Rich McGinnis. So good to see all of you this morning. So you have the floor if you can give introductory remarks and take it from there. We've also been joined by my colleague, City Councilor Tim McCarthy. Thank you, Chief.
Mr. Chair, my name is Chris Cook. I'm the Chief of Environment, Energy, and Open Space for the city, and well positioned to answer hopefully any and all questions you might have about the proposed wetlands ordinance and also our positions on an expanded ordinance. It's a very exciting time to be speaking about this, especially in regards to our plans for a resilient Boston Harbor, to create more protections for our city through for sea level rise that are projected in 2050 and 2070 and beyond. I'm going to defer the balance of my time with a few just acknowledgments of our hardworking staff. I just want to give proper credit where it's due. We're joined by the staff for the Conservation Commission here today, Amelia Croteau and also Nick Moreno, and I thank them for everything they do in the Environment Department, their hard work, but also I want to thank the citizen volunteers of the Conservation Commission, as well as the members of the advocacy community who have given up their precious time to join us today on this important subject. So with that, I would defer the balance of my time to our Environment Commissioner, Carl Spector, and the Deputy Director from the Boston Planning and Development Agency, Rich McGinnis.
Thank you, Councillor Flaherty. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today concerning the importance of Boston's wetlands and the steps that we can all take to protect them more effectively. As you all have pointed out, wetlands and other green and open spaces provide important benefits to the Boston community: stormwater management, wildlife habitat, recreation, beauty, and more. Wetlands in Boston are subject to many pressures, including the effects of climate change, particularly sea level rise. For this reason, the Boston Conservation Commission protects wetlands through its enforcement of the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act. Under the Act, the City of Boston may create a local wetlands ordinance that can provide even stronger protections than those available under state law. The Conservation Commission held informational hearings several years ago to discuss the elements of a local ordinance. In December 2016, the city's Climate Ready Boston report, which laid out a long-term framework for preparing Boston for the effects of climate change, looked toward the development of a local wetlands ordinance. I appreciate the leadership that you and Councillor Wu and Councillor O'Malley are showing in bringing this into the consideration of the Council. To be clear, we strongly support development of a local ordinance. Because wetlands protection involves many interacting forces and complex interests, it's important to get the details right. My brief comments on the current proposal fall into three areas. First, the proposal introduces some changes not related to the effects of climate change. In the last few years, the Conservation Commission and many people in the community have been frustrated by the Commission's lack of jurisdiction over vernal pools and isolated vegetated wetlands, as these areas contain important habitat and contribute significantly to stormwater management. The current proposal would extend the city's oversight to these areas, a step we support. Second, there are changes that are related to climate change. As the proposal recognizes, foreseeable rises in sea level, coastal storm strength, and precipitation intensity mean that it is no longer sensible to confine our oversight to the current 100-year plain. It appears that to remedy this in part, the proposal would extend Conservation Commission jurisdiction to the 500-year plain and also establish special transition zones. If the use of the 500-year floodplain is indeed intended to address climate issues, conceptually, this may not be the best approach. Considerations about the chance of getting a particular size of storm are different from considerations about the chance of reaching a certain level of sea level rise. Since we have detailed climate-ready Boston projections of what the 100-year floodplain will be with varying amounts of sea level rise, it would be better to use those rather than relying on the 500-year floodplain designation. Furthermore, those maps, the projections with the sea level rise show that sea level rise within the next few decades is much more consequential than the difference between the current 100-year and 500-year flood. The Boston Planning and Development Agency now requires that all new development projects evaluate the project relative to the extent and elevation of the 100-year floodplain associated with 40 inches of sea level rise. There is a detailed public-facing map of this condition, which we expect to see before the end of the century. It would be useful to give the Conservation Commission the authority and flexibility to extend its jurisdiction to a similar extent, perhaps in several steps. The proposed special transition area for marshes, banks, and beaches is an interesting idea. The fate of Belle Isle Marsh in particular is, for me, a nagging question. However, we are concerned about the practicality of predicting likely migration routes for these vulnerable areas. I look forward to hearing additional testimony on ecological and legal aspects of this idea. An overriding concern for us in any new ordinance is the room that it makes for implementation of Major Walsh's vision for a resilient Boston harbor. As you know, the mayor presented this harbor-wide picture last October, and it builds on detailed plans previously released for East Boston, Charlestown, and South Boston. We have recently started planning for downtown and the North End, and later this year we will launch a similar initiative for the Dorchester coastline. The current proposal includes extensive references to allow some flexibility for these initiatives, but we are not sure that they are sufficient. We need to look at this carefully. Finally, a few words on the administrative and procedural aspects of the proposal. In its existing jurisdiction, about 3,000 parcels of land are already subject to the oversight of the Conservation Commission. We will need to be clear about how many more may be encompassed in any expansion of jurisdiction. I know that we share the goal of ensuring that our wetlands laws and regulations are both effective in protecting the public interest and safety and respectful of the time and private interests of Boston residents and businesses. We will need to make sure that we develop necessary internal resources to administer any ordinance and clear, straightforward guidance and procedures for those who must comply with it. As one example, we should carefully consider the appropriate distance for defining abutters of any project. Thank you once again for the opportunity to be here today. I look forward to a robust deliberative process and to working with you to develop a fair and effective ordinance. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Richard?
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty and members of the council. My name is Richard McGinnis. I'm Deputy Director for Climate Change and Environmental Planning from the Boston Planning and Development Agency. As a former Executive Secretary of the Boston Conservation Commission, I developed my planning career through the lens of wetlands and coastal resources in urban areas, with the benefit they provide to the city of Boston. With the challenges of climate change before us, the value of wetlands in addressing extreme precipitation, heat waves, and coastal flooding is even more needed. I'm joined today by Brian Glasscock and Chris Bush of the BPDA Planning Department, both former executive secretaries of the Boston Conservation Commission as well, up in the audience. We support a local wetlands ordinance and believe one of its primary benefits is public awareness of future flooding risks. 2 years ago, we published an online mapping tool that depicts where flooding will occur in Boston at various sea level rise projections combined with coastal storms. While the maps are currently available to the public, an added layer of awareness through administration of wetlands ordinance will underscore risks and allow our residents to make prudent choices in protecting their well-being. Last October, Mayor Walsh announced over 16 initiatives related to climate change and the challenges of sea level rise and coastal storms. Initiatives that range from new flood-resilient zoning to a system of open space that will protect the city from storm surges. We are currently developing a sea level rise zoning overlay district that could complement a wetlands ordinance and overlap with the wetlands ordinance. The zoning will provide guidance on how to retrofit various buildings typologies at risk and also modify the zoning to allow for these retrofits. We're developing requirements for new growth to design for future flooding risks, so less voluntary and more requirement for new developments in the future floodplain. Public process on the overlay district will commence in April. The draft wetlands ordinance is a good start, but requires some revisions to address the unique urban context for the city of Boston. There's over 5,000 acres of landfilling in Boston. Our shoreline has been altered. It needs to be reflected in any promulgated regulations. Our hardened shoreline has limited potential to be reclaimed or naturally transitioned back to wetlands without dramatic actions. Also, as we look at modifying our shoreline to protect the city from flooding through elevation changes, living shorelines along our shoreline, and new landfilling, we need to make sure that this ordinance doesn't preclude the ability for us to protect the city. We're pleased to see reference to understanding the public value of wetlands resources, and if they can be improved to transition to other types of wetland resource areas. For example, land subject to coastal storm flowage may not have a lot of value in the city of Boston, but a coastal bank or a dune that could be augmented to protect the city from flooding could actually have greater public value and benefit for the city. The proposed language that requires further analysis and discussion, we're happy to join the council in those. For example, special transition areas are flagged as a possible resource area, but we need to acknowledge that they are highly developed and may not naturally transition to natural area. Also, the 25-foot no disturbance zone would limit flood barriers, our ability to build flood barriers, expand harbor walk, and maintain an already densely developed shoreline. Our shoreline is very developed, almost up to the water's edge. And then land subject to coastal storm flowage has limited value compared to other type of wetlands resources that we could achieve through resilient open space and design along the waterfront. I just want to thank the council for this opportunity to comment. We look forward to getting to more specific comments and questions through working sessions. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything additional, Chief?
No, we're here available for your questions.
Very good. So we've also been joined by my colleague, City Councilor Frank Baker, and my colleague, City Councilor Josh Zakem. Chair recognizes Councilor Wu if you want to start some questions.
Thank you. I'm going to save most of my time so that I know we have 2 other panels and lots of folks who want to testify. Just curious, does the administration, would you be able to provide any draft version of ordinance that you all are working on, or?
Yeah, we have draft comments
Okay,
available
perfect.
based on yours, and then we also have conceptual thoughts around most of the major points that are articulated, and we'd be happy to share them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Good. Chair recognizes Councilor Anissa Sabi at this time. She's good. Councilor Siomo, any questions? Councilor McCarthy, any questions? Councilor Baker, any questions at this time? Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilor.
Morning, panel. Thank you. How are you today, Rich?
I'm fine, thanks.
Good to
Thank
see you.
Counselor.
One thing that you said was preclude us from protecting the city. Is that 25-foot, so we won't be able to build the berms and some of the protections
Right.
in that space? Is that what you meant by that comment there?
If there's a no disturb area, that means that no disturbing for any type of infrastructure that could limit our ability to build a flood barrier. For example, we filed for a FEMA grant to build a berm along the 4-point channel at the water's edge, which is within the 25-foot buffer zone. So it would preclude something like that.
And that's an important berm there, I would think,
Yes.
with the way
Yes, and
4-point was flooding.
And we see more of these type of elevation changes, berms, living shorelines in every neighborhood to protect the city from flooding.
And you mentioned transition areas. Will you explain to me what a transition area is?
So I think in this draft, a transition area is, with more flooding and even high tides that would flood the city monthly, that the current kind of flood-prone areas for extreme storms could transition back to a natural environment, which we would believe would be hard to do in the downtown area, particularly because it's already landfill. Doesn't have the right hydrology, so it couldn't transition.
Hydrology, nice word. Explain it to me.
Just the type of soils.
Okay.
So it's all landfill, so it could be concrete, stone, gravel, all sorts of debris that couldn't act as a foundation for wetlands vegetation.
So when we're looking to, are you looking for soil that's going to hold the water or water to go through it? What type of soil would you be looking for?
I think both to absorb a heavy rain event, but also something that could dissipate wave action, but also hold floodwaters back into the city. I think we just want to recognize that a lot of the landfill isn't great soil.
Yeah.
And while it may be, fall into the category of land subject to coastal storm flowage, it doesn't have a lot of value in that, and it's already densely populated. So we just want that kind of recognized in this draft.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Councilor Zakem. If Councilor Zakem have any questions at this time? Very good. So thank you, obviously, Chief and Commissioner and Deputy and Floodplain Manager. Would you guys be willing to stay for us for a little bit for us?
Of course.
Yeah, so that'd be great if you can hang tight just in case we have any back and forth. But I'm going to call upon Pam Harvey, who's the Vice President of Advocacy for the Massachusetts Association of Conservation Commission, and also Nathaniel Stevens, who is with McGregor and Laguerre, if they could come down and offer some testimony. And then we'll go to and then the third panel will be after that, so. Very good, thank you. come on in. Yep, you're more than welcome, sure. So you want Nathaniel to get it started. Very good. So if you could state your name and affiliation for the record, you have the floor, and then we'll go right down the line.
Good morning. Thank you very
Welcome.
much for having me. My name is Nathaniel Stevens. I'm from the law firm of McGregor and Legier here in Boston. We focus on land use and environmental law and related litigation. We represent a diversity of clients, developers, private property owners, opponents to projects, citizen groups. We also work for municipalities, particularly conservation commissions, by helping them defend their decisions, as well as help them with enforcement matters. In addition, I serve on the Arlington Conservation Commission. I've been there for a number of years, I like to say, over 10. So that adds some perspective to my comments as well. Our firm and I also do some training for the Massachusetts Association of Conservation Commissioners. Pam is here on their behalf today. And just last month at their annual meeting, I featured a draft of the proposed Boston ordinance in a workshop that I was giving to conservation commissioners about how they could incorporate climate change resiliency into their wetlands bylaws or ordinances. So I'm happy to be here today to further that work. Just a number of comments about this ordinance. This ordinance would give the city greater permitting control about what happens in these wetland resource areas in the floodplains than the commission currently has or the city has under the Wetlands Protection Act. As you may know, the Wetlands Protection Act is a state law. It's administered first by the Conservation Commission, but any decision can be appealed to DEP. So DEP's decision is ultimately what controls. A local wetlands ordinance or local bylaw in any municipality gives a municipality such as Boston greater control. Any decision there that the Conservation Commission makes under a local wetlands ordinance is appealed to court. So in essence, the city is the final decider on these matters rather than DEP under the Wetlands Protection Act. This ordinance, as we've heard from the prior panel, would cover a greater geographic area than the Wetlands Protection Act would. For instance, the Wetlands Protection Act only covers and regulates the 100-year floodplain. As you know, those are the areas that have a 1% chance of flooding, and this would expand it to the 500-year floodplain, which are areas which have a 0.2% chance of flooding. In addition, isolated wetlands, not just bordering vegetated wetlands, are proposed to be regulated, and vernal pools would be proposed to be regulated on their own. Presently, the Wetlands Protection Act only regulates vernal pools in certain circumstances. As mentioned also on the prior panel, special transition areas would be created, which would allow salt marshes, barrier beaches, and banks to migrate as sea levels rise landward. The greater jurisdiction combined with greater standards, they're called performance standards, are necessary to have a strong local wetlands regulatory program. Including provisions for climate change resiliency in this wetlands ordinance is a natural fit. Many resource areas already serve to mitigate many of the effects of climate change, such as flood control, storm damage prevention, rise in temperature, etc. So this is really a logical place for the city to try to prepare for climate change resiliency through its wetlands program. This ordinance would enhance the city's lead in addressing climate change resiliency and very much help it prepare for the effects of climate change. This draft, I notice, reflects approaches that other municipalities have taken, such as Arlington, but also Duxbury, Hingham, and Kingston, among others, and I think it builds nicely upon those. So I commend the drafters for taking a look at those other communities and adding to it. I note that it's important for any conversation or any regulatory program that deals with climate change to have to define many of the terms. It's new vocabulary for many of us, for myself still, and I think it's an important thing to have, and this bylaw includes many good definitions. This is important because for many, climate change might be more of an abstract, broad concept, And when you get into the Conservation Commission settings, when you're trying to apply these concepts to particular projects, particular settings, it's good to have those definitions. So those are my comments. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Very good, thank you. Welcome, Pam. Also state your name and affiliation for the record.
Good morning. I'm Pamela Harvey. I'm Vice President for Advocacy at the Massachusetts Association of Conservation Commissions, MACC. I'm also an environmental lawyer, a member of the Brookline Conservation Commission, right next door. And I actually also worked at the Department of Environmental Protection for 24 years with a lot of work involving wetlands and regulatory programs. So my comments may reflect that background as well. MACC encourages the development of local programs to regulate wetlands that are tailored to their local needs. As Nathaniel mentioned, you know, the State Act and the local bylaw to sort of work together and their jurisdictional areas. And I want to make clear that wetlands are not just, in Boston, there's a lot of discussion about the harbor front, but there are many other wetland areas, and including areas that flood, rivers, streams, and vernal pools, among others. Well, it's true that many of these areas in Boston have been altered, filled, they're no longer in their natural form. That may mean that it's even more important to protect what's left and for the beneficial values that they provide. And perhaps most importantly at this point, I think it's reduction reducing pollution and also for flood control, which is very important in light of climate change. I want to make 3 points. First, that the local wetlands ordinance, such as Boston's, can work well in urban conditions. Second, it's a good tool within the context of other permit and planning efforts. And third, that it can be designed for efficient and effective implementation by the Conservation Commission. Beginning with the extent to which its local program can be tailored to urban conditions, I think that typically the ordinances have performance standards stated broadly, and then what project applicants have to do is more specifically spelled out in regulations. And I wanted to note that there are some regulations that DEP has used in the riverfront area that you might want to take a look at for purposes of implementing the performance standards for riverfront area, but also other areas as well that could be of interest to you. For redevelopment of previously developed or degraded areas, and there are specific provisions that would apply to those areas with the goal of improving existing conditions and encouraging positive reuse of degraded areas, and can actually allow expansion of development in exchange for restoration or mitigation. And the larger jurisdictional area can be used to promote green infrastructure, pervious pavement to help infiltration and provide flood control benefits, even planting of more trees, which is something I think Boston's been interested in. So in any event, I think that there are tools to be used to make it, the regulations specifically work well in areas that have been quite altered at this point. Second, about being tailored to fit in with other permit and planning programs, which Boston clearly has, Climate Ready Boston, the Resilient Harbor Plan. The ordinance does actually have a provision which would specifically allow flood protection projects. It it looks like it's focused a little more toward habitat, and you may want to look at that, but certainly you don't want to get in the way of coastal resiliency projects. Floodplain zoning and wetlands protection programs do work in tandem in other communities that have local programs, so that can be coordinated. And the requirements will be specified by the Commission's regulations, and applicants will know about them at time of project review, so they can take those into account. And finally, implementation by the Concom. The local ordinance is administered in tandem with the Wetlands Act permitting, so it fits in on the same time frame, and the additional requirements are taken into account. Typically, the program can be supported in part by additional fees, which are typical for local programs. The reliance on maps helps, whether or not it's the 500-year floodplain map or the other boundary that was just mentioned about the 100-year plus the 40 feet of inches of sea level rise. That maps can really help with implementation, making that easier for applicants and clarity in getting permits issued. There can be, in practice, provisions for administrative review that can help, and continuing conditions for ongoing maintenance, so that can make it more effective. About 200 municipalities have local ordinances or bylaws, and that I think itself is a testament to their success in the Commonwealth. So in conclusion, I would just say that a local wetlands ordinance can be really an excellent tool to better protect wetlands for the beneficial functions they provide, and it's even more important now in the face of climate change, and also really for urban areas that are vulnerable in many ways that more rural areas are not. So that would be my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we're also joined by Julie Wood. Julie, if you can state your name and affiliation for the record, that'd be great.
Sure. Good afternoon. I'm Julie Wood. I'm with the Charles River Watershed Association. I manage our science and research program. This is the non-attorney side of the table. I'm here representing Charles River Watershed Association in support of the ordinance protecting local wetlands and promoting climate change adaptation in the city of Boston. We support this action, which will protect both the natural and built environments and will help us adapt to climate change. Climate change is a public threat that should factor into every decision this body, as well as the city administration, is making. The ordinance is a good first step by codifying this into wetlands permitting processes. This action was specifically recommended by the Climate Ready Boston process, a robust and inclusive process that vetted and prioritized ideas for helping the city thrive in the non-steady state of a changing climate. The ordinance will protect our existing natural resources and the functions and values they provide. This is the lowest of low-hanging fruit in climate adaptation. Preserving what we have and keeping these areas healthy so they can protect us from flooding, reduce pollution into the environment, sequester carbon, recharge groundwater supplies, support plants, animals, and ecosystems migrating in a changing climate, cool surrounding areas, and provide scenic and recreational opportunities. Some of you may remember I have spoken before this body in the past, suggesting that we consider transitioning developed areas into wetlands. Also something I think we should do. This is a much easier task, protecting what we already have, as was mentioned by the previous panel. According to the National Institute of Building Sciences, every $1 invested in disaster mitigation saves $6. For riverine flooding, in particular, the savings were found to be $1 mitigation, $7 in savings from recovery. The areas the ordinance proposes to protect are areas that are wet, or areas that are likely to be wet. The city should take action to protect these areas as well as potential impacts to existing surrounding properties. The Conservation Commission has specific expertise and experience that will allow them to do this. This group can review individual projects in light of cumulative impacts to the health and safety of natural systems and the built environment. The commissioners understand the values of these local resources, what they're providing to the city, as well as the potential impacts to the city if their health is degraded further. We support the resource area as defined, or at least more inclusive is better. I will note some communities in our watershed do use local wetlands ordinance as a tool to actually expand wetlands permitting to the entire community. This is scientifically a somewhat logical approach, since all of the area in the city does drain to some water body. However, we appreciate that Boston may not be willing to go that far with the resource area, and certainly support what is proposed here. So happy to take any questions.
Very good. Thank you very much, Julie. Any questions of my colleagues? Councilor Wu, you can start.
Thank you very much for your time and your expertise. I just wanted to, because unfortunately the way we're doing with all the separate panels, I'm going to try to convey some of the questions that I am seeing in the testimony from, I think, folks who will be on later panels or represented in later panels, just to get your perspective as well, and then we'll try to ask that way too. So I think, Pam, you kind of mentioned this in terms of how an ordinance might fit in with other regulatory tools or programs or projects. But one good point that A Better City brings up in their testimony is that there is a lot happening with the vulnerability assessments and planning and Climate Ready Boston and all the potential zoning overlay district. Any thoughts from any of the panelists on how to kind of do this in tandem? So, one suggestion is, do we just wait until decisions are made about what a zoning overlay district might look like versus what the timeline of the Resilient Boston program, or how can we do this so that it still leaves room for everything to be integrated? And if you have examples from other municipalities who do this well, that would be helpful too.
Most communities do have some kind of floodplain zoning, and I think, I'm not sure that why it would be necessary to wait on this until that was in place. But certainly you would want to sit down again before, I'm not sure, I don't think there's anything in the ordinance that would not be on its face not complementary, but I think you would want to sit down in writing the regulations to put all the pieces together so that they are compatible.
In the point where it gets to the Conservation Commission, you
Yes,
need to issue the actual regulations?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, the commission may have, further views on this. I certainly hope they do. But anyway, I think that it's, again, it's not at all unusual. As a matter of fact, it's customary for there to be floodplain zoning of some kind, and it works along with I think most communities already have that, but it works along with the local program.
Any other thoughts, Nathaniel?
I would agree with Pam's comments that I think a lot of that can be, any potential inconsistency can be worked out in the regulations that the Conservation Commission issues. In Arlington, the Conservation Commission actually provides input as into where the floodplain overlay district is, and we also have a wetlands overlay district as to where that map is drawn. So there's communication between the Conservation Commission and the Planning Department about that.
Got it. Okay, so just looking at some of the points that NIAP will bring up later, I believe. We talked a little bit about the interaction with the Resilient Boston and hardening the coastline. Could you comment, anyone have any thoughts on, the administration had brought this up too, the 500-year storm versus 100-year storm events and what that might mean? The comment here is that could, moving from a 100-year storm event and coverage to the 500-year, could envelope most of East Boston and South Boston.
I have not looked at a comparison of how that would be, how far the extent would be on a map. So I'm not going to comment on that. I would comment that it is good, I think, to have something that's clear on a map, because that helps applicants to be able to come in. So whether or not, I think that the 500-year storm may have been selected because that is mapped and has been used other places. Yep. But, if there's something that's more fitting to Boston's needs, it would be perfectly okay to put it under local bylaw. I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts on that?
I do think it's important to be inclusive of areas where flooding is likely to occur, and more inclusive rather than less, because the city is in a unique position, or in this case, the city as represented by the commission, is in a unique position to take a broader view. So certainly, while a property may a development, let's say, have really great intentions on protecting, their own building or their own future residents from the impacts of flooding. It's also important to consider that in the broader context of how this development may impact surrounding areas. And I think by having projects in these areas come in front of the Conservation Commission and having the Conservation Commission help vet that out, specifically in light of this ordinance, kind of charging them to consider climate adaptation in their decision-making process, that is important, because we can't have these single properties sort of arming themselves or building resilience at the expense of others, and that's the role the city can play.
Okay. And then my last question, again, one of the points that NIAP brings up, and we'll hear from folks from the real estate community later, in terms of a transition, and if you've seen when other cities actually pass the ordinance and issue the regulations, and then the shift in the rules, how, if there are effective dates or a period of time or some recognition that those already in the pipeline are not subject to the, how have other cities done that?
I think generally the cities and municipalities do set in their regulations a deadline as to when these regulations will take effect. They also, you might say, an application that's already been filed and in process, is or is not subject to these regulations or certain provisions in those regulations.
Yeah. And so, some communities put online information for prospective applicants that can explain the process a little bit, so that can help too when things are first passed, as well as ongoing, because it's always new to a new applicant. So.
And I would say, I think regulations help everyone, the commission, applicants for sure, because it provides these specifics. The ordinance is more of a, generally an ordinance is more general, setting sort of the goals and the fundamental aspects of its jurisdiction, what it protects, and the resource area values. But it's the regulations that get into the details about what needs to be in that application, what the plans need to show, what the Conservation Commission considers and can't consider, and things like that.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Obviously, I agree with much of what you're saying and your analysis, but I appreciate your time. Councilor Seymour, you're next.
Thank you. Hi. Well, thanks for providing this testimony. Thank you. Hi, Julie. Just wanted to ask you, I think you said during your testimony that entire communities are designating themselves as wetlands. Did I hear that correctly?
Well, what they're doing is they are requiring, basically they're extending the resource area to include the whole community. So not that, basically not that the whole community is a wetland, but the whole, any land use change, development, any change that goes on within that community is deemed to affect, their rivers, their wetlands, and therefore any project in the community would have to get.
So would trigger this.
Yeah.
Right. And do you have a list of those communities?
No, but I can find out at least which ones in our watershed.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful
Okay.
because, again, we're trying to grapple with affordable housing, and it'd be interesting to see what communities are using tools to prevent them from having to build more affordable housing. I think that's happening a lot, outside of the city of Boston. I appreciate that. Thanks.
What is next? I think Michael's list has Councilor McCarthy next. No? Good. Councilor Baker, and then Councilor Zakum.
Are any of you familiar with Frontage Road at all, the Frontage Road whole parcel? No, okay. So my question is, and maybe we can answer this offline, how does this affect that? Is this about, a little bit about Frontage Road and so that would have been my question. How is this gonna affect the Frontage Road parcel? Is this, I mean, does that prevent us from building our needs on Frontage Road, because we have real needs there, and I know there's talk about trying to bring that back to original wetlands, and that's would be my big concern on this here. So, but that's probably more of a question for the previous panel. Right. Thank you.
And I actually, to that point, because I had a couple of questions similar to that. So maybe this is in Rich McGinnis's wheelhouse, Frank's question, as well as what the current ordinance would have on the what the proposed ordinance would have on the current interim planning overlay districts, as well as, if passed, what impact would it have on projects that are kind of currently in progress, currently in the pipeline of having either just received a permit or they're in the process of permitting? Would there be some type of grandfather clause? So I don't know if those are things that Rich or someone from the first panel could address. You're more than welcome to come down and address them, address Frank's question. And then while you're here, if you can address those two. And in the interim, I think, does Councilor Zachem have any questions of this panel? So while Rich McGinnis is coming down, why don't you put your questions forth?
This may be for this panel, maybe for Rich, it may be for the sponsor. So I would just share my concern. If there's not an easy answer, that's fine. But seeing what areas of the city would fall under these new restrictions, I think would be very useful in evaluating this. I don't know if the chair or the sponsor has this available in a map form, or if this is Rich you might have, or Chief Cook or anyone. So apologize for the open-ended nature, and I'm not sure who that is best to, but that would be very useful.
The short answer is that we, I believe, are still early enough in the process that I think a lot of the exact boundaries and radiuses and this and that are all under discussion. And so we haven't generated a map yet, but I know that will certainly be, I think, good feedback all around on the need for that. Eager to see the administration's comments and their potential draft as well before we do anything like that.
Thank you.
But I also know, and I can't speak for the chief, but I know that Chief Osgood, we've seen maps, at least I've seen a map where my house is underwater. So I think those are the types of maps I think that Councilor Zachem may be referring to. So I assume that somewhere in your office you have a bunch of different maps, a bunch of different potential scenarios, 20 years out, 30 years out, 100 years out. So maybe you can speak to just some of those maps that you have possession of.
If it's all right, I can speak just very specifically about a strong consideration that we would want to consider as part of the ordinance. We are happy to share any of the climate-ready plans that we have. And obviously, a lot of the floodplain maps that we have, when we were talking about, Commissioner Spector testified about the concern about just limiting it, just tying it to the 500-year maps. What that doesn't allow us to do is allow flexibility to neighborhoods that actually might be more vulnerable in certain circumstances from things like wave action, so there are some neighborhoods that may receive inundation at a potential earlier date in a 1% storm than other neighborhoods. And we would also caution, we would be very excited to work collaboratively in a working session, because one of the other considerations I think we'd have to take up, and Councilor Baker, I think your point is well served, as opposed to looking at just specific parcels that might be inundated in a 500-year plain. The Conservation Commission may be able to exercise and determine the scope of the applicability of the new wetlands ordinance over time, so that way that projects that are potentially in the pipeline or projects that are conceived of could receive heightened scrutiny at an earlier point than other projects. I would defer to Rich McGinnis at the Boston Planning and Development Agency how such, how that oversight would work.
Back to the mapping, we do have the 500-year floodplain mapped out. That's a FEMA demarcation, and it's actually almost equal to a 21-inch sea level rise projection that we've mapped out through Climate Ready Boston. Our online mapping tool has a 40-inch sea level rise by 2070. So if you look at the life of a building that's being permitted, it's most likely going to get up to 2070. So we would recommend utilizing that kind of projection in an ordinance and not the 500-year floodplain, as the commissioner just mentioned.
Right. Mr. Chairman, just a quick follow-up. Does anyone, and again, won't hold you to a ballpark, are we talking about 10% of the city, 30%, 70%?
So we have the actual potential parcels that would be impacted by the current proposed ordinance. We'd be happy to send that along. But again, we would just caution that it would be advantageous for the Conservation Commission to have more dexterity as to when to apply that regulation.
Sure. Yeah, thank you.
And Richard, you say 21-foot sea rise?
21-inch sea level rise is almost matches the 500-year floodplain, FEMA's 500-year floodplain.
Sure. Interesting. And then just the final question was, what impact would that have on the current interim planning overlay districts?
The map we're using for the overlay district is the 2070 40-inch sea level rise projection. So it's a greater part of the city than the 500-year storm.
Okay. And then Frank's question, Councilor Baker's question, how does this sort of deal with the frontage road issue?
Well, frontage road could be seen as a future transition area. Our kind of mapping of future flood risks includes frontage road. That was flagged under Imagine Boston 2030 as a growth zone for development, but only if we can develop flood protection mechanisms to prevent inland flooding in that area and other areas. And those are things that we're trying to develop along the 4-point channel, are these elevation changes to allow growth to occur there. Frontage road and Whitehead Circle is all disturbed land, so it's not something that would easily transition back to wetlands unless you had a substrate, brought in new wetlands, soils, that type of thing. But our goal is to allow growth to occur in the city responsibly with flood protection mechanisms for frontage road and other lake sites.
So you don't see this adverse, you don't necessarily see this adversely affecting us moving forward with that plan there?
Well, I think with some language changes in this draft, the way it's drafted now, there's an assumption that there'll be a form of retreat in the city in land subject to coastal storm flowage and future land subject to coastal storm flowage, and that's not the plan. The plan is to augment our shoreline to allow us to continue to occupy, filled lands around Boston.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Rich. Any other questions of this panel at this time? Not seeing no. So thank you to our second panel for your time and attention. You're welcome to stick around and listen to our third panel, which will consist of Greg Vassell, CEO and President of the Greater Boston Real Estate Board, Mike Giamo, who's an attorney at Robbins & Cole, and I did see, I see Chip Nyland is here, I know, and maybe Chip can come down, and Stephanie Krull, maybe you guys can come down and be sort of a co-third panel. You may or may not have similar or competing interests, but I figured maybe we'll just coordinate and combine you guys as one panel and open yourselves up for some questions, so feel free to sit wherever you choose. And we'll start with Greg and Mike, and then we'll go with Chip and Stephanie. So welcome and good to see everybody. Morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the council, Councilor Wu. For the record, my name is Greg Vassell, and I'm the CEO of the Greater Boston Real Estate Board. On behalf of our 12,000 members in our 5 residential and commercial divisions, as well as this morning we're joined together on this panel with our friends from NAOP and their 2,000 members. We welcome this opportunity to testify on this ordinance. The board is supportive of a wetlands ordinance that would allow the city to be dynamic and flexible when it comes to climate change and climate change issues, as long as it will also allow developers the ability to meet the needs of a growing and changing Boston. We applaud Councilor Wu and Councilor O'Malley for their vision and their efforts on this ordinance. However, we feel that the ordinance at this time is unworkable. But we do stand, as we always do, ready as a resource to this body and the city moving forward, helping in the working sessions to try to come up with something that meets the needs of the city, both from a climate change and a wetlands perspective, as well as from the development perspective. Before I turn it over to the experts in the Wetlands Act, there are 4 policy areas that I wanted to touch on that I thought were really important, and I don't know the answers to, but struck me as I read the ordinance. And we've just touched on this for a while, is how does this ordinance affect and fit with the city's effort to be rezoned? I think that's really important for us to look at that, because the worst thing that we need to do, the last thing we need to do, is to be doing things twice and wasting our time. So, you know, we have developers and we have people in the real estate industry that are dealing with zoning issues, and they're going to be looking at climate change, and then we're going to also be addressing it in the Wetlands Act. I think that's an issue that we really need to focus on. Number 2 is, what does this do to housing? We know we have a housing crisis. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about a tax on all real estate, over $2 million to pay for housing. Has anybody sat down with D&D and looked at what this ordinance would mean to the amount of housing parcels out there? What does it do for housing? I don't know, but I think somebody should look at that long and hard. What does this ordinance do for property values? We know when you have a major piece of land use regulation like this, it can often lead to a diminution in property value. We all know that the city, 70% of the city's revenues for its budget are dependent on property values. Does this ordinance, or would this ordinance affect that, and what would those costs be? And then last but not least, I think it's important when you pass major land use regulation like this to say, what does it do to what does it do to the cost of doing business in Boston? How does it drive it up? Is there a number you can look at? Could we look at a developer in East Boston that has a large tract of land that would say, geez, if we did this, I would lose X amount in property values, and it would cost me an extra $25, $30 a square foot in regulatory and permitting costs? I don't know the answer to that, but I think as a body, we owe that to people in the city, because we want to be a city that people want to come to. We want to encourage business here, and we don't want to make it so expensive that, just to harken back to the housing, that we just keep producing for the high end of the market and we can't produce for the middle. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mike Giano from Robinson & Cole, who will talk more specifically on the ordinance.
Welcome, Mike.
Good afternoon, councilors. My name is Michael Giano. I'm a partner with the law firm Robinson & Cole. My firm was asked by the Greater Boston Real Estate Board to review this ordinance from the standpoint of how it will affect property owners and development in the city of Boston. And this afternoon, I want to briefly focus on just a few of the concerns we had about this proposal. First, the ordinance would significantly increase the amount of riparian area subject to review. Currently under state law, Boston's riverfront area, in which Conservation Commission review is required under the Massachusetts Rivers Protection Act, is limited to the area between the river's mean annual high water and a parallel line located 25 feet away. The proposed ordinance would regulate a riverfront area that is 200 feet wide, 8 times the current width. This has the potential effect of subjecting significantly more land and significantly more development to Conservation Commission review. Before adopting a provision like this, the city should know how much additional land in the city would be subject to review on this basis, and what that would mean for the development potential and the value of that land. Second, the state regulations under the Rivers Protection Act expressly hold redevelopment to a more relaxed standard than new development of previously undeveloped riverfront. But the ordinance does not. Instead, the ordinance, in defining the Conservation Commission's jurisdiction over the riverfront area, ambiguously requires the commission in its regulations to, quote, include provisions for previously developed areas for purposes of project review. This does not provide any guidance to the commission as to what the effect of those provisions should be. And at a minimum, the ordinance should specify that the intent of such regulations should be to accommodate and facilitate redevelopment of previously disturbed area if the development maintains or improves on the existing conditions. And third, in addition to requiring a permit applicant to demonstrate that its projects will not have unacceptable significant effects on resource areas, the ordinance also unfairly requires the applicant to determine and evaluate cumulative effect of its project on resource areas in light of other reasonably foreseeable future development projects. The ordinance requires the commission to consider both the impact of the activities that are actually the subject of the permit application and the individual and cumulative adverse impacts on protected resources arising from reasonably foreseeable future activities when it evaluates a project application. The ordinance defines cumulative effect in a way that future activities within a site, district, or institutional area identified within an annual budget, capital spending plan, master plan, plan development agreement, or equivalent document approved by the City of Boston or any other government agencies are considered to be reasonably foreseeable future projects for the purposes of the ordinance. This puts an applicant in the difficult and costly position of having to determine and account for potential resource area impacts of a wide range of potential activities for which no site design or other relevant planning may have been done, or may be at an early stage of planning or design and subject to change, or that may never come to fruition at all. Thank you for your time and the opportunity to comment on this ordinance.
Thank you very much, Mike, and we're going to start with Stephanie. Stephanie, welcome. If you could just state your name and affiliation for the record, that'd be great.
My name is Stephanie Krull. I'm a senior environmental planner at VHB, which is a design and engineering firm with an office here in Boston. I'm also another former executive secretary of the Boston Conservation Commission, as are many in the audience. I am a member, along with Chip Nyland, of the Mass DEP Land Subject to Coastal Storm Flowage Advisory Group. We're drafting regulations with performance standards for land subject to coastal storm flowage that will be integrated into the WPA at the state level. And today I'm speaking on behalf of NAIOP, the Commercial Real Estate Development Association. I'd like to talk about some opportunities that we see with the development of a local wetlands ordinance. First, it provides an opportunity to support the mayor's vision for a resilient Boston Harbor and avoid adding roadblocks to protecting the city from the impacts of climate change. Second, it provides an opportunity to tailor regulations to Boston's environment and further protect wetland resource areas that are not adequately protected by the WPA. Third, we have an opportunity to make sure that we are using the right tools to deal with different aspects of climate change impacts, knowing that there are a variety of tools we can use to protect both the built and natural environments, from policies and regulations to ordinances that are administered by various city departments and agencies. A local wetlands ordinance should focus on protecting the interests of the wetlands resource areas, while tools such as zoning and building code are better positioned to protect the built environment. And finally, we see this as an opportunity to bring together members of the Conservation Commission, city officials and agencies, city staff, local organizations, and concerned citizens to identify issues of concern and work together to devise solutions. We feel that the ordinance as drafted presents many technical problems, and it does not necessarily take advantage of all the opportunities that I just described. So NAIOP looks forward to participating in an upcoming working session to address these issues and help produce an effective local wetlands ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. And Chip, welcome.
Thank you for having us. I don't have any prepared remarks. I figured by the time you got to me, we'd hit most of everything. I did want to echo what Stephanie had said, that we're not opposed to a wetlands ordinance. I've been practicing this law for a long time. I've been in front of commissions that have them and commissions that don't, and there's certain value to having it in the city of Boston. I was on my own commission for 9 years, and I actually drafted the wetland ordinance up in Ipswich, which is still around. So I've got some experience. I think what I wanted to do is just reference a couple of the items. Councilor references is a good start. I think I agree with almost everything that's been said today. It's hard not to agree with what has been offered by the department, by the advocates, as well as by the real estate community. The 25-foot no disturb was the first one that bothered me, only because when I see the resiliency plans that have been advocated by the city, that having no build and no fill would obviously run counter. However, the 25-foot no disturb can have an important role in protecting wetlands outside of the harbor area. So what I would suggest to you, there's a couple of ways to do it. One is you could write an exemption for coastal resiliency plans, or number two, you could write in a waiver provision. You know, you usually need a basket to catch things that are unintended. So I think that it's not fatal, but I think no disturb, the way that it's written, I don't think will advance those positions. The second is the transition, which I raised because we had that in the riverfront. If you have Article 80 and you have a lot of larger projects that have gone through a very long process, and suddenly this is thrown upon them and they have to redesign the entire project. Now, it doesn't mean that the city's not protected. You have a building code that establishes that you can't build beyond the elevation of right now. But in terms of for the future, I think you want to have a time period that you can allow people to pursue the existing approvals, and then this will take effect at a later time. And I don't think that's going to harm the community. I do agree with Carl in terms of the 500-foot. The reason that we said it's going to expand into almost all of East Boston and South Boston, the way I read the way the ordinance is written is you have a buffer zone on top of the 500-foot floodplain. That is, you say the buffer zone applies to all inland and coastal wetlands, and that this would be a wetland. So in addition to the flood elevation, you're going to go beyond that. I mean, the one thing that you will always hear from the development community is we want certainty. Tell us what the rules are. And I think not knowing where those lines are would present us with some difficulty. And I think adding that buffer zone, I'm not sure that there's a value to adding the buffer zone to the 500-foot. So as everyone has said here today, we look forward to participating in the workshop. I think that there's a good structure here. I think it's important that we protect the infrastructure and the transportation and existing utilities, and that we don't have an ordinance that could harm that.
Good. Thank you, Chip. Thank you to this panel. Questions of my colleague, Councilor Wu?
I guess I would thank you so much for your time and for the commitment to working together moving forward. Again, was hoping this would be a working session, but wanted to make sure that I think the chair and administration had felt that we wanted to make sure to have a full public hearing on the refile of this. I think I would like to start where Chip had ended, actually, and ask everyone else, you know, what value do you see? Because I think I heard all along the line that everyone is supportive of the idea of a wetlands ordinance. What is, as we are trying to work together on a version, what are the kind of elements of value that you would like to see preserved in that wetlands ordinance? Things like certainty or protection of infrastructure. What are the other elements? Why do you think it would be good for Boston to have a wetlands ordinance, assuming that there could be some acknowledgement of the issues that you had brought up?
Well, I think others have talked about your areas that are not regulated by the Wetlands Protection Act. Remember, you have the Wetlands Protection Act, and case law said a long time ago that you can have a local bylaw that can occupy other areas. So you've already identified vernal pools and isolated, or what we call freshwater wetlands, that aren't regulated in the Wetlands Act. Those are bordering wetlands. I don't mean to get into the weeds. So you have areas in the ordinance that you will be regulating that you would not otherwise be regulating. I think that's number one. Number two is that you have your own required permit. It's not just the wetlands permit is all you need right now in Boston, and the appeal process goes to DEP. If you have your own ordinance, you have a separate permitting process. You have different performance standards, and you have a different appeal process. And third, you're going to have the opportunity that I see to incorporate your climate change and sea level rise performance standards, which haven't been land subject to coastal storm flowage on the Wetlands Act. They're looking at that. And it's probably should happen sometime in the next year. But this will allow the Conservation Commission through regulations to establish performance standards. So I think those. I'll defer to others, but those are three things that come to mind to me.
Thank you.
I would like to add that I think that this is an opportunity for the city to identify, to use as their starting place, identifying which resource areas are not currently protected to the extent that they should be, and with climate change in mind, which resource areas do we anticipate may not be protected in the future? And I think we need to look to start there rather than starting with we have a tool. How can we use it? It's what needs to be protected, and how can we tailor our tool to use it? So I think that's a really good opportunity, and the fact that Boston doesn't have a local wetlands ordinance yet gives us a chance to kind of start fresh and make a really good start on that.
Perspective, the most important thing for us is take a look at the economics. What does it mean financially? What does it mean for developers? I don't think anyone would disagree with we need to protect the city. We need to protect our environment. But let's see what it costs, and let's come up with some real numbers. Sometimes we act, but we don't think about that.
And I would just say in terms of the tool, I mean, process is also very important. If there's a way to accomplish some of the same important goals with less process, even without a new permitting requirement, a new review requirement, a new potential route of appeal for people who want to challenge a development, there are already many development review processes that the city has to make sure that development addresses different planning and other issues. And if this could be incorporated, or much of this could be incorporated into those processes, that might be better as well.
Can I just throw one more thought is, let's make sure we take our time and we do it right, and we don't rush for political expediency, but we really process this, talk to a lot of people, and make sure we get it right.
Anything else? Very good, thank you. And there's no other questions of this panel at this time, so thank you for your time and attention. And we're going to shift to public testimony. I have the sheet here, Tom O'Brien, followed by, it looks like Deb Beatty, followed by you, Tori, followed by Matthew Barrison. And it looks like, hard to make out the writing. The last name is definitely O'Brien. Looks like maybe Fran O'Brien or Francis O'Brien? Frank, I'm sorry, Frank O'Brien. Who will be followed by Kanan. As I see Kanan is in the audience. Kanan, and you'll. So welcome, Tom O'Brien. Please state your name and affiliation, and you have the floor.
Thanks, Councilor. I appreciate. Thanks very much for allowing me to be here. I appreciate Councilor Wu, everybody's involvement in this. My name is Thomas O'Brien, and I'm with a company called the HYM Investment Group. One thing that's pertinent for today, we're also the owners of Suffolk Downs, which is a 161-acre parcel located in East Boston. I wanted to kind of just be here to lend my voice to a couple of themes that I think have emerged from everybody who's testified today. One is I just would encourage the council as well as the administration to take the time necessary to make sure that this comes out well. I think that's a really important point. One sense I get, just being an outside observer, here, but familiar with this building, is there seems to be an undercurrent of a need for the administration and the council to kind of get on the same page on this, and I just would encourage people to do that. I think there's a lot of us in the, who are outside of this building who would love to lend a hand to try and get to an ordinance that would work well for everybody. We do agree that an ordinance is needed in Boston, so we're certainly open to that. I would respectfully suggest that it's probably not, it sounds too easy to compare Boston to other communities that have already enacted ordinances. I heard Kingston and I heard a few other communities like that. There's a lot of, as you could hear, a lot of complication that has to be, sort of sorted out in Boston. I would say there are 3 or 4 key things that I just wanted to rise and talk about. One is, I think the last panel focused on the 25-foot no disturbance zone, which is a really, for us to create the inflexibility around that would prevent, I think, some surprise situations that people around the city now recognize as really interesting pieces of open space. Elements of the Esplanade. There are pieces around various parks in every neighborhood in the city that might not exist today where this 25-foot no disturbance. It's important to note that the no disturbance is, you can't do anything there, right? So as Chip noted before, having some kind of a back door that would, or not a back door is an appropriate thing, but a way to allow people to do something that is appropriate with the process appropriately, followed. I'd also just note that the ordinance also increases the jurisdiction of the commission from 25 feet to 200 feet around rivers and streams, and that I'm going to move that down, and The standard by that says, this is me reading from my notes here, preponderance of the evidence that there is no practical alternative to the proposed project with less adverse effects. It's a pretty heavy standard, and it's a standard without much in the way of direction, which I think was a previous testimony as well. So we're concerned about that. There's been a lot of discussion about the differences between the 100-year and the 500-year storm. I would agree with the theme that there's a lot of work in the various regulatory bodies to make sure that there's a lot of review of projects. The last thing I would kind of say, and there's been some testimony on this as well, there's a variety of different pieces of space that today kind of fit into a wetlands definition, everything from gullies to ditches to pieces that are paved channels. Sometimes the channel itself is paved, sometimes the channel is paved on both sides. And to elevate these to a status that might be on par with, say, the Muddy River and the Fens or the Charles River, to us requires a lot of process to really think it through. We did do some mapping ourselves just to kind of understand what the effect of the ordinance as currently written would be. It would have a very significant effect on us at Suffolk Downs. We've tried very hard to present a very responsible proposal to use our open space to manage the effects of climate change, the potential effects of climate change on our parcel. We're all about building housing where we are. We're going to build 10,000 units of housing. So I think, as Councilor Siomo sort of picked up, there are some communities that have used these ordinances to prevent the construction of housing, where there are communities that want to prevent more construction of housing, and I think we'd want to be cautious to be sure that we're not doing that here. So with that, I'm happy to close out, happy to answer questions if you have any for me.
Any questions?
Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. Deb Beatty, looks like Deb Beatty Mel. Welcome, Deb.
Hi, thank you. My name is Deb Beatty Mel. I live in Roslindale. Any complex system with many parts has some parts that are more visible and attractive and other parts that are unglamorous, but important to the working of the system. A wetland is like that. When you say the word swamp, images of mud and mosquitoes and skunk cabbage probably come to your mind, but with every rainstorm, it quietly does its job, collecting the runoff, storing it, filtering it as it makes its way back to the nearby rivers and lakes. For the first decade that I lived in my house, I did not appreciate the value of the Roslindale wetlands. But when a developer came along in the mid-2000s with a plan to build houses inappropriately right up to the wetlands edge, it was a wake-up call for the community. The neighbors organized in opposition, and later on we built a trail, we cut back invasive plants, we removed piles of junk, we planted dozens of trees. We came to really appreciate the riotous bird life and the other animals that make their homes there. When I read in the city's climate action plan about the need for neighborhoods to have pockets of green space that could handle rainwater runoff, I knew exactly what they were talking about. The developer backed off for a number of years, but they're back again and pressing forward today. With the acute need for more housing in Boston, I appreciate that the pressure is on to overlook the value of these humble, unglamorous green spaces, not only in Roslindale, but in neighborhoods throughout the city. A local wetlands ordinance will bring a necessary balance so that these vital but sometimes overlooked corners of our city are given the value and the consideration they truly deserve. I would urge the council to enact a robust local wetlands ordinance that empowers the Conservation Commission to fulfill its role as a steward of the city's green spaces, the glamorous as well as the unglamorous, so that we don't let the push for development compromise natural resources that are quietly doing their job to the benefit of the larger community. Thank you, and I do have a handout to leave behind.
Very good. Thank you, Deb. You, Tori? Welcome you. If you could.
Chairman Flaherty, Councillor Wu, my name is Eve Torrey. I'm the Director of Sustainability Programs at A Better City. A Better City is a business organisation. Its members are about 130-ish of Boston's largest businesses. A Better City agrees that there is an opportunity and need for local wetlands protection and climate change adaptation in Boston, and that we all need to work together to address this serious threat to our future. We at A Better City are very focused on the Climate Ready Boston effort that is underway, and we also support the Boston Planning and Development Agency's Flood Resiliency Overlay District and Resiliency Design Guidelines. One concern that we want to raise is if commercial development and property owners are asked to comply with the new requirements of this ordinance, in addition to proposed requirements of the BPDA's overlay district, and what is being speculated as new requirements for existing buildings and new construction as part of the carbon-free Boston process. This burden may be challenging and could put certain properties at a competitive disadvantage. The timing of all these proposed changes needs to be closely coordinated so that the City of Boston and property owners can together be effective in implementing a strong approach that responds to climate change impacts. Our second concern is related to the supplemental jurisdiction, authority and procedures required of the Conservation Commission. The ordinance and its regulations to protect additional resource areas will require additional standards and procedures stricter than those of the Wetlands Protection Act. We are concerned that the Commission will not have the capacity to implement and enforce the ordinance. Therefore, we ask the City Council to put pause on this ordinance until the vulnerability assessments and planning underway as part of Climate Ready Boston, the planning underway for the city's flood resiliency zoning overlay district, and the planning for existing buildings and new construction under carbon-free Boston is completed, so they can all inform each other and be integrated and the capacity issues can be addressed. A recent example of a meeting we had last week with some of our members, we hosted focus groups for the BPDA's Flood Resiliency Overlay District and Resiliency Design Guidelines. One of the key takeaways from developers and asset owners alike was the concern that proposed development and existing buildings requirements for both mitigation and adaptation be combined so that there's one high performance and resilience building standards, so they won't be required to do overlapping changes to their buildings as Boston's climate planning process proceeds. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. Frank O'Brien, followed by Matthew Barrison. And I see there's a Heather O'Brien that had signed but did not indicate whether she wanted to testify or not. If she wishes to testify, just give me the signal, and I will include you. So, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon. Frank O'Brien with the Allendale Coalition. I'm here to present to the council a letter of support which has been emailed to you. It's the letter that's entitled Final Letter. There were some last-minute organizations joining. To summarize very briefly, the letter's a top-line statement of support. As has been stated by many of the other speakers and the panelists, this is just the start of a problem-solving issue resolution process, and we all look forward to participating in that. I would draw your attention, the council members' attention, to one part of our letter which addresses the question of climate justice and environmental justice and the related issue of where wetlands ordinance review falls in the overall city permit review process. One of the goals, I think, of this ordinance is to front-load resource assessment, not have it at the end as an afterthought within the Article 80 and zoning roadmap of project review. I'll illustrate the reason for that point from our experience in Jamaica Plain with the Allendale project, 64 luxury car-dependent units, where it fell to a senior citizen within the adjacent spring house to himself research and fill out the wetlands delineation forms. Fortunately, we had the resources to do that. We also had the resources to hire very capable counsel to represent us at the zoning board as well in front of the Conservation Commission. As we well know, not all of our neighbors in Boston have that ability, nor should they be expected to. It's the city itself that has the burden of informing and enforcing, and we think the Conservation Commission should be an equal partner with BPDA and the other departments in our common effort to both protect and to grow. And we look forward to participating as this process moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Matthew Barrison. Welcome, Matthew. If you can state your name and affiliation.
Good afternoon. My name is Matthew Barrison. I live in East Boston, and I'm the chairman of the Harborview Neighborhood Association. I'm speaking on my own behalf. Let me just start with the nitty-gritty. Section G, paragraphs 18 and 19 states that the permits issued under this regime would be valid for 3 years and could be extended for another 3 years. That seems a bit long to me. I would ask that you maybe take a look at that, perhaps 2 years with a 1-year extension period. Also, Section J on enforcement of this provision, twice it mentions the non-criminal alternative provided under MGL Chapter 40, Section 21D. However, upon review of that, it seems that state law allows for a maximum penalty of only $300. So I'm not sure if that was intended or not, but that seems like a very low fine for violation of some part of this new regime. Speaking just to some of the other comments that were made, I would suggest that, well, of course, everyone wants this to be done right and to be done carefully. Change can't wait. And that's something that I think this body is very familiar with. And I think that is the position that most residents and homeowners would take when it comes to implementing this regime. We need it sooner rather than later. And I think every developer, large developer, knows that this is coming down the pipeline and that they're going to want to rush to get it in beforehand. So I think grandfathering in projects that have already been started is risky and dangerous. Finally, I'd say that the ordinance dovetails very well with the mayor's Resilient Harbor project, and especially the early action items that were outlined in the mayor's proposal, namely regarding Wood Island and the Belle Isle Marsh in East Boston, two very vulnerable areas. As we saw at that fire recently at the casket company, a lot of containment had to be done. So these areas are very vulnerable, and I thank you very much, Councilor Wu, for putting this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Kanan. Good to see you, Kanan. State your name and affiliation. And Kanan will be followed by Jill, looks like Howard, and then finally Sarah McCammon.
Thank you, Councillor.
Welcome back, Kanan.
Good to be here. My name is Kanan Thiruvengadam. I live in East Boston. I'm also with the Friends of Belle Isle Marsh. The wetlands serve 3 purposes, and in so doing, they are helping with the mitigation of climate change. The purposes are serving as a storm buffer. When the storm approaches, the wetlands take the brunt of it. That way, they do protect the neighborhood. And wetlands also help with mitigation because they're capable of carbon sequestration. So this is something, we can go into large words like hydrogeomorphology. I'm sorry, Councilor Baker is not here. He would ask me what that means. But we can look that up. The way wetlands work, they sequester carbon. That is the opposite of what's happening. And because we're losing more carbon to the atmosphere, we're causing climate change. Wetlands would reverse that. 3, they would reduce the heat island effect that we suffer from in urban spaces. Developed areas radiate more heat, and therefore you would have seen that when you're inside the city, it's hotter on a hot summer day when you're outside or when you're in a garden or in a wetland. So because of all these 3 purposes and characteristics that wetlands have, they serve prevention of climate change. And if you want to use the word mitigation, that's fine also, because they reduce the emission of greenhouse gases and help us deal with the consequences of climate change that are inevitable anyway. So pinning prevention against cure It's like somebody who's suffering from obesity-related complications saying, I don't want to cook and eat a good diet. I don't want to work out because I need the time to go to the hospital to deal with my illness because of obesity. You have to work on prevention. Prevention is also justice for the future. And anything that we do, like Governor Baker, I think, has said, we could take mitigation money from Reggie and put it into adaptation. That is taking money from the future and putting it towards the present. And if you don't do prevention, and if you're constantly reacting to sea level rise, then you will always be building the seawalls higher and higher and will be living in a bathtub. So having said that, it is important to protect wetlands. It is possible, I think, to have a more nuanced regulation that says we can exempt when some sort of resiliency measure, some sort of building is critical, and make room for that. And finally, one very good quick point. Green infrastructure and blue infrastructure is known to increase property value, not reduce it. Thank you.
Thank you, Hanan. I've also been joined by my colleague, City Councilor Lydia Edwards. Well, is it Jill?
Yes.
Welcome, Jill.
Horwood.
Horwood.
I know,
Jill.
terrible handwriting.
That's okay.
Good afternoon.
Not worse than mine.
My name's Jill Valdez Horwood. I am the Director of Policy for Boston Harbor Now. I also happen to be a former Boston Conservation Commissioner. I want to thank Committee Chair Flaherty, fellow members of the Council, for the opportunity to speak to you today about the proposed draft of a wetland ordinance sponsored by Councilor Wu and Councilor O'Malley. To date, standards outlined by existing building codes, zoning codes, and related policies and regulations have been reactive to coastal storm events. It's only after a storm event that these are updated, and often under the assumption that future events will be similar in magnitude and impact. This approach assumes that environmental conditions are static. Last fall, numerous reports, including a study by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, appear to indicate that not only is climate change shifting our baselines for temperatures, storms, and sea level rise, but it's also occurring at a more rapid rate than prior studies had anticipated. We also know that increased rates of sea level rise result in the loss of wetland areas through what is often referred to as coastal squeeze, particularly in areas that are surrounded by urban uplands like Boston Harbor. The loss of wetland areas leads to the loss of all of its ecosystem benefits, including essential habitat, the capacity to buffer inland development from impacts of storm. They have the ability to lower overall flood heights, protect people, property, infrastructure from devastating flood damages. We agree with the Council that the current wetland regulatory framework needs improvement. In the face of anticipated climate change, it's crucial that we advance a framework for assessing the threat to wetlands posed by climate change in order to develop a response that also considers the city's resiliency priorities. So as a key ally, Boston Harbor Now supports efforts to update regulations to equip Boston with the tools it needs to adequately prepare and address the climate issues our city and neighborhoods are facing. As the ordinance moves to a working session, we want to emphasize the following. First, the need for stronger efforts to engage and coordinate ongoing planning and policy initiatives, especially with the BPDA, the city's Environment Department, Parks Department, the Boston Water and Sewer Commission, interested stakeholders, environmental advocates, and importantly, again, as a former Boston Conservation Commissioner, the full participation of the current Boston Conservation Commissioners. The need for language that advances and does not prevent or overburden resiliency plans and projects. The need to focus on broader climate adaptation strategies that go beyond the existing parcel-by-parcel approach. And the need for special consideration of the variety of existing uses along Boston's waterfront, especially in the case of water-dependent activities that require immediate access to the harbor. We should explore solutions that maintain public access on the waterfront while also protecting development inland. We applaud the committee for its initiative and this very important initial step. Now is the time to continue to advance this effort even further. Boston Harbor Now, along with those in this room and many who could not be here to testify today, welcome the opportunity to work together toward our mutual goal of protecting and preparing our city for a future where we can not only continue to thrive, but also adapt to the effects of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joe. And we have Sarah. Welcome. Good to see you, Sarah.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah McCammond. I'm with the 4 Point Neighborhood Association, and I want to thank you, Councilor Flaherty and Councilor Wu, for this opportunity to speak on an ordinance protecting local wetlands and promoting climate change adaptation in the city of Boston, which has been filed by Councilors Wu and O'Malley. My brief remarks are going to focus on climate adaptation. Climate change is a top issue for Boston waterfront neighborhoods. Currently, there's only voluntary climate resiliency guidelines without any enforcement. And a local wetlands ordinance would empower the city's Conservation Commission to address this gap. Much of coastal Boston is in a flood zone, and that extends into our inland neighborhoods. During the climate-ready planning process, the city identified the South Boston waterfront, especially the 4 Point Channel, as one of the most vulnerable areas impacting not only our channel front, but also our inland neighborhoods, and as needed protection extending toward Dorchester. The South Boston Coastal Resilience Report referenced a local wetlands ordinance and the implementation of design strategies for South Boston. A local wetlands ordinance is just one more tool in the climate adaptation toolbox to help protect harborside neighborhoods from coastal and stormwater flooding. Other tools are the BPDA's Flood Overlay District and Climate Resiliency Guidelines. We need every available tool. We desire the local wetlands ordinance to be the best it can be for Boston and fully support a working group with all the appropriate stakeholders, especially the CONCOM, the BPDA, and Boston Water and Sewer. But we have a sense of urgency. The city has undergone 3 climate-ready plans in East Boston, Charlestown, and South Boston. Now is planning in the downtown and North End to be followed by Dorchester. In 4 Point, the last 7 remaining acres of our channel side is in the process of being purchased for development. We urge the local wetlands process to move forward in tandem with the BPDA Flood Overlay District and Climate Resiliency Guidelines Initiative. In terms of implementation, water will find any path or available route. If properties are grandfathered and don't perform at the same standards, it impacts adjacent properties that are not compliant. We cannot wait. We support a local wetlands ordinance. We look forward to being a part of future conversations and developing it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. We've also been joined by my colleague, City Councilor Ed Flynn. Anyone here that has not heard their name called that wishes to offer public testimony may do so now. Or forever hold your peace, seeing and hearing no desire for any additional testimony. That will close out the public testimony portion, and then I'll allow my colleagues, if they have any sort of parting thoughts. It appears I'll work with the lead sponsor. It looks like this will probably move to a working session, I guess, that folks here are obviously invited to participate and observe and what have you. So with that, to close out the hearing, we'll address any of my colleagues. Does Councilor Edwards have any questions at this time? And Councilor Flynn, any questions at this time? No. That's true thing. So the chair recognizes Councilor Michelle Wu.
Just want to thank everyone for your time and looking forward to continued conversations. It seems like there's some very strong commonalities here from everyone who spoke, and so eager to work with the city to get this right in a collaborative way that is both urgent but also focused on getting the details correct as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for hosting this.
Thank you, Councilor Wu, for your efforts, and also for the efforts of Councilor O'Malley, who I know that who very wished and wanted to be here, and unfortunately, due to a death in his family, he was not able to make it. But I'm sure that he'll be conferring with us and reviewing the tapes and the written submitted testimony. So with that, with respect to docket 0250, an ordinance protecting local wetlands and promoting climate change adaptation in the city of Boston, the Chair of Government Operations has this hearing adjourned. Thank you.